The story titled Just Mercy begins in 1987 in Monroe County, Alabama, where Walter Johnny D. McMillian, an African-American who owns a small pulpwood business, is wrongfully arrested, convicted, and sentenced to death for the murder of an 18-year-old woman named Rhonda Morrison. Despite the lack of credible evidence, he remains in jail until his execution date. The narrative then shifts to Bryan Stevenson, an idealistic Harvard law student who visits a local jail in Jackson, Georgia. During his visit, he meets Henry, a convicted murderer, and informs him that the Southern Prisoners Defense Committee, where he is interning, will arrange legal representation for him. Bryan reassures Henry that he is not at risk of execution in the coming year, which brings Henry relief. They share laughter and childhood memories until a police officer abruptly interrupts, taking Henry away, leaving Bryan shocked by the treatment. 2 years later, after graduating, Bryan declines lucrative job offers and decides to move to Alabama to defend those wrongfully convicted or unable to afford legal help. He hopes to fight for their freedom and meets his colleague Eva Ansley, with whom he plans to establish legal services for death row inmates. Their first challenge arises when a white landlord refuses to rent them office space upon learning they will be representing death row inmates. Frustrated, Eva decides to start their work from her home. While at Eva's house, she shares how a story about a death row inmate inspired her to seek justice. Just when she was about to give up, she receives a call from a Harvard lawyer offering federal funding to help start their legal center. Bryan then visits a prison to meet 6 inmates, but faces discrimination when guards demand he strip search before entering. Despite this, he connects with the inmates who share their experiences of mistreatment by the legal system. One inmate, Herbert Richardson, a Vietnam War veteran, discusses his PTSD and explains that he placed a bomb on someone's porch, but never intended to kill anyone. Walter McMillian, on the other hand, is skeptical of Bryan's ability to help, having been let down by previous lawyers. He warns Bryan that the system is brutal, especially for black men who challenge it, and expresses his frustration over being convicted without real evidence. Back at Eva's home, Bryan reviews the files of the inmates he met and informs Eva that he believes Walter is innocent. He points out that Ralph Myers, the main witness against Walter, has a criminal history and was convicted in another murder case. They suspect that Myers provided a false testimony to the police, who were under pressure to solve the case quickly. Bryan decides to meet with Tommy Chapman, the district attorney, hoping he might be open to reconsidering Walter's conviction. During their meeting, Bryan expresses his concerns about the reliability of Walter's conviction, but Chapman dismisses him, stating that reopening the case would upset many people in Monroe County. Bryan insists that his duty is to seek justice for his clients, not to maintain comfort for the community. After leaving, he witnesses 3 black men being arrested, reinforcing his determination to fight against injustice. Bryan visits Walter's family, who firmly believe in his innocence. They recount how Walter was hosting a fish fry for their church on the day of the murder. A family member reveals that Walter had an affair with a white woman, which led to damaging rumors that escalated to accusations of murder. Despite the hurt caused by his infidelity, Walter's wife, Minnie, stands by him. Bryan also meets Darnell, a friend of Walter's son, who confirms that Bill Hooks' testimony is false. Darnell was with Bill on the morning of the murder, fixing a car, but they were arrested for burglary. After some hesitation, Darnell agrees to help Bryan by signing a statement that contradicts Hooks' claims. When Bryan visits Walter again, he finds that Walter is impressed by his efforts and begins to trust him. Walter wonders why a Harvard lawyer would choose to help death row inmates, prompting Bryan to share a personal story about his grandfather's murder, which opened his eyes to the indifference of society towards marginalized communities. This heartfelt conversation leads Walter to agree to let Bryan reopen his case. As they work on Walter's case, Eva receives a threatening phone call warning her to stop helping Johnny D. Despite the danger, she remains committed to their cause. They begin searching for someone in town willing to speak about the incident, but most are too afraid to go against the powerful family of the murdered girl. Eventually, a former police officer agrees to meet with Bryan, providing a glimmer of hope. They officially name their organization the Equal Justice Initiative, reflecting their commitment to fighting for fairness. However, trouble arises when Darnell is arrested while at work, and he blames Bryan for his troubles, deciding to withdraw from the case. Bryan feels frustrated by the situation. When Bryan visits Sheriff Tate, he finds the district attorney laughing with him, indicating they are working together to obstruct his efforts. The district attorney informs Bryan that his motion to reopen Walter's case has been denied, leaving him feeling defeated. Nevertheless, Bryan and Walter discuss their next steps and decide to confront Ralph Myers directly. During their meeting, Myers initially avoids discussing Walter, but eventually reveals that he was pressured by the police to provide a false statement. This revelation leads Bryan to investigate further, uncovering discrepancies in the timeline of Myers' testimony. He discovers a tape recording where Myers admits he knows nothing about the murder, contradicting his court testimony. As the day of Herbert's execution approaches, Bryan feels the weight of the situation. Despite the heartbreak, he continues to fight for justice. Myers eventually confesses that he was threatened and coerced into lying, and during the trial, he breaks down and admits that Walter had nothing to do with the murder. With new evidence and testimonies, Bryan's case against Walter strengthens. However, the court still refuses to grant a new trial, citing insufficient evidence. Walter is returned to death row, and Bryan worries that his efforts may have worsened the situation. Despite the setbacks, Walter expresses gratitude to Bryan for fighting for him, stating that he feels like himself again for the first time since his imprisonment. This renewed hope motivates Bryan to escalate his efforts, preparing to present evidence to the Alabama Supreme Court. Bryan appears on a public television segment to raise awareness about Walter's case, which ultimately leads to the Supreme Court granting a new trial. However, the district attorney attempts to delay the process, but during the court hearing, he unexpectedly supports Bryan's motion. As a result, all charges against Walter are dismissed, and he is finally released from prison after years of wrongful incarceration. The story concludes with an epilogue detailing Bryan's continued work, helping over 140 death row inmates, and proving that justice delayed is not justice denied. Bryan and Walter maintain a close friendship until Walter's passing in 2013, and the epilogue also highlights the story of Anthony Ray Hinton, who was freed after spending 28 years on death row, thanks to Bryan's efforts. Subscribe to our channel for more contents like this.